somebody in a shirt like this on the way out, and when you filled it out, give it back to somebody in a shirt like this, okay? So I'm going to turn it over to Angie here for her presentation. Thank you very much, guys, and enjoy.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Steve. So my name's Angie. I'm here to talk to you today about fans of The Walking Dead. So I'm a PhD student at the University of Calgary in the Department of Communication and Culture, and this panel is kind of part of a series or a stream of panels that kind of highlight more academic focus. So before you all run for the door, it's really just me kind of talking about my research interests, which are quite varied. And, you know, just to give you a glimpse of what you can do in the world of academia, especially when it comes to the study of pop culture. So today, my research interest is primarily in fandom. So I'll tell you a story on how this panel kind of came together. I was actually in another academic conference, and they had a Walking Dead panel. I was really excited, couldn't wait to see it. And the first guy that came on was a comic book fan, and he proceeded to spend 20 minutes bashing the show, saying how much he hated it, how inferior it was to the graphic novels, and really just kind of took, you know, sat there for 20 minutes and went to town. And I just found it fascinating up until his last sentence, which he said, I really don't like the show, but I will continue to watch it because I love this franchise, I love this series. And to me that was so fascinating, is that he just spent 20 minutes spewing all of these reasons why the show was completely inferior, but you know, yet he said he would continue to devote hours on end watching it. So I'm a Walking Dead fan. I am not a fan of the graphic novels. I've only read the first trade. It didn't appeal to me. I'm a drama fan, I'm a television fan. So that's how I kind of came to the show. And I am probably the minority in the room, but I really liked season 2, and I liked all the talking. I am not a gore person. I liked the drama. So I kind of looked at myself, and I looked at this guy, and I was like, you know, we both kind of are watching the show, and it's interesting that we kind of, we're talking about the Walking Dead franchise, and we have such different views on it. So that's kind of the impetus for this presentation. And I was really kind of interested on his subset of fans. So that's kind of how this whole thing kind of came out, and I really wanted to see, is this an anomaly, knowing that it probably wasn't, that there probably was tons of people like that. There might be some even here today, and you can proceed to throw things at me, but for me that was interesting. It was interesting to explore. So that's kind of what I'm doing today. So let's break it down a little bit. What is a fan, right? Let's start from the basics. I just kind of took a quick smattering of images. When we define the word fan, I mean, we can distill it down and really just talk about that. But for the purposes today, when we talk about fan, it's pretty obvious, right? It's something that you enjoy and you kind of devote some kind of your personal life to, right? It usually translates into, I don't just watch the show, but I kind of do something extra, that there's an implied investment to it, right? So here I've just got a smattering, you know, the Cumberbitches, the Pottermores, the Whovians. Really, the easiest way to think about a fan is sports teams, right? If we think about that. There's a lot written about these kinds of fans, right? Like, this is kind of the meat of fandom literature. What is kind of gaining momentum is the flip side to that, and that is known as the anti-fan, right? Finding pictures without insulting anybody was more difficult in this case, but it's kind of relevant to the conversation. You kind of have to sketch out the both ends of the spectrum, right? So we've got the fan at the other end, we've got the anti-fan. And Jonathan Gray kind of was the first person to coin this term, and he says, these are individuals that are equally devoted in their opposition of an object as traditional fans are in their devotion or admiration, right? So, again, anti-twihards, there's tons of them, right? There may be some in here today. Think about hate watching, this kind of phenomenon, right? Where you watch something because you really don't like something, but you want to have a basis for your vitriol, right? Or your criticism, right? 50 Shades of Grey is another great one, right? Every time I say that, there's immediately an anti-fan that kind of comes up, but you ask, did you read the book, right? Well, I only read a little bit, or probably hadn't read it much at all, but Anti-fans are kind of consuming the same text, consuming them knowing that they don't like them because they want to have that clout, right? And again, go back to a sports analogy. This is just Calgary. I'm not a hockey fan. I don't know, but I mean, it's easy to see that dichotomy, right? Calgary, Edmonton. So where does the guy that I was telling you about in the beginning, where does he fit, you know, when we talk about a fan or anti-fan? So let's talk about Walking Dead fans. In my kind of research for this project, I was trolling some Walking Dead forums, right, to try to figure out, you know, what are the fans of The Walking Dead? How are they made up? And this one guy, username Greek Salads, if you want to look him up, he or she, kind of gave me this really nice handy list. So I thought it'd be useful to kind of just go through this, maybe see where you fit in, right? I'm assuming that you are familiar with The Walking Dead in some form or another. But we have the general fan, right? And the general fan is the person that, you know, watches each episode every night. He enjoys the episode, he or she enjoys the episode, but at the end of the day, he's going to keep his cool. It's just something that he watches and enjoys, right? Then we have the super fan. Super fan is the person who talks non-stop about The Walking Dead almost every day. He's read the comics multiple times, same with each episode of television, has memorabilia, right? And is taking a crap load of time on the internet and over social media nitpicking and talking about the show with his friends, right? Then we have the nitpicker, the actual nitpicker, who always consistently finds at least 2 problems with every single Walking Dead episode, right? And these are common lines that we hear from the nitpicker: bad writing, jumping, you know, I'm jumping the ship. Why can't this show be like Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, right? So much better, blah, blah, blah. So the nitpicker kind of tends to focus on the most irrelevant errors, you know, in terms of continuity, mistakes, and kind of considers the show in the oeuvre of television overall and television dramas. Then we have the honest critic, and this is kind of where your bloggers come in, your reviewers, your recappers, right? They kind of say both good and bad of every episode, and I must say that I probably fall into this camp, right? I can't say I love something wholeheartedly. Just the nature of academia kind of trains you to do that. But there's always good and bad. There's always good and bad in everything, and that's kind of what he defines the honest critic as being. Then we have the hater, and the hater is worse than the nitpicker. He just hates everything, right? Literally, this is just another name for the anti-fan, right? They'll talk about how much the show sucks, how it's so unrealistic, right? Because the zombie apocalypse is, you know, the pinnacle of realism. But we don't really understand, you know, these are people who troll, right? That's probably the easiest way to think about it. People who troll the message boards and just pick on everybody's little comment. Then we have the Daryl fans, right? This is, you know, mostly females, but not to exclude, right? But really, it's all about Norman Reedus and his SS hotness, right? And then we have the graphic novel fan, right? So it kind of overlaps a little bit with the super fan, bigger fan of the comic than the show. But they tend to be happy, right? They tend to be happy that they get this franchise, and this is kind of something that I'll talk about later on, but you know, they kind of came to the show because they had this love of the comic book beforehand, and you know, Kirkman is a big part of that. So the guy that I was talking about at the beginning, I'm not suggesting that his, you know, kind of fan is the majority. I'm not at all suggesting that. It's more that this group exists, and try to find out, you know, where do they land on the fandom spectrum, especially with regard to the academic literature, because how can somebody love something so much yet simultaneously hate it, right? That's kind of what I found really interesting, and it's not really something that's been addressed or theorized in the existing literature. So I scoured online to try to find whether or not this guy was an anomaly, and you don't have to read the whole thing, but I just kind of pulled quotes. Now, just a caveat, the way in which I pulled these quotes, there's no rhyme or reason. I tried my best to go to kind of major sites, you know, not obscure sites, but I mean, if anybody's bored one day and is looking to, you know, find a particular kind of fan, just go through message boards on various websites and you will be sucked into this void of, oh my God, right? But I did manage to find a few that kind of emulate this guy that I was talking about at the beginning. So what do we have here? We have WeGotThisCover.com. This gentleman, the comic books are better in nearly every way, and season 3 was a travesty. The fact that he's watching up until season 3 shows some kind of devotion, right? He's bashing the show. He is a comic book fan, and that's one of the another things that I found in common in lots of the comments is that these people would say, well, I'm a big fan of the comic books. First off, let me say I'm a big fan of the comic books. Like, it's some kind of, you know, I have legitimacy because I've read the comic books, right? Now I can therefore bash this show, right? Because I'm still a Walking Dead fan. TV.com, which I figured was, you know, kind of a major site, TV.com. This better pick up in season 4. I've already devoted a lot of time, but I'm still going to watch season 4 despite this show has gone downhill. The comics are way better. So that's just a smattering. Some general observations. The comics are just far more superior. That's kind of the quotes that I pulled. Usually the ones that I tried to pull, these people have at least watched up until season 2, which signifies an investment, and there's this hope, there's this real ardent hope that things are gonna get better. They're terrible, and oh my god, I'm so angry at, you know, all the talking and debating and not enough zombie action. But there's this hope that things are gonna get better. So another kind of subset that might fit into this is bloggers, right? Now, they're a little bit more nebulous because, you know, bloggers or reviewers, they're kind of assigned the show and they have to write about it, so they have to kind of watch each one. But, you know, the blog posts that they do, they're fodder. They're fodder for this group of fans that I'm really interested in. So this comes from ScreenCrush.com. Sorry, The Walking Dead will never be good as the comics. So he says after 4 seasons, again, right, watching for quite a while, and then if you scroll to the bottom, even if the show improved, it would still have a hard time matching its source material, right? So there's, again, it's this versus that, right? It's like these things can't exist harmoniously. It's this kind of dichotomy. This is from WeGotThisCover.com. 10 reasons why the Walking Dead comic is better than the TV show, and he outlines 10. But what I found interesting was his kind of opening line. He says, I know what you're thinking. Great, here's another pretentious comic book loving hipster whining about how AMC's is soiling the name of his beloved Walking Dead. And, you know, he goes on to kind of cover his bases, right? So the comments that kind of come from the blog posts kind of weed out the fans that I'm talking about. What do I have here? So Crack.com, 5 reasons why The Walking Dead has to get better, right? Again, it's this hope. It has to get better because I'm going to keep watching and I'm going to keep complaining about it. And this is an interesting line that I pulled from here. I don't watch it because it's a good show. I watch it because I really want it to be good. So, I mean, that's kind of very revealing. In terms of, again, this kind of us versus them, right? TV versus comics. These can't exist. Now, it's not to say that there aren't that subset of fans that love both, right? They're certainly present as well. But again, it kind of goes back to, well, what about these people who love/hate it at the same time? Like, aren't they, you know, how are they reconciling that? How are they wrestling with that? So why is this interesting? Why should you care about any of this? And the key to this is Kirkman, essentially, at the end of the day, right? So Kirkman is he's the creator of The Walking Dead, right? The graphic novels, but he's also one of the executive producers of the television show. And he said on occasion that they're not meant. The television show is not an adaptation of the comic book, right? They're meant to be complementary pieces. He says, quote, they're supposed to be radically different, although there is some of the same plot points, some of the same characters. At the end of the day, it's kind of a way for him to revisit his stories and, you know, make different choices through the television show, right? So with the source material, right, the comic books, with the creator of the source material so deeply ingrained in both of these objects, it's, again, begs that question, how can these fans, quote-unquote fans, you know, feel so polar opposite about these things, knowing that the creator has his hand in both of them? So the question is, are these fans both fans and anti-fans? Do they kind of occupy this same space? And what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of fandom? So ultimately, what could be done to bring Team Comic, as I'll just kind of name them for now, to be kind of Team TV/Comic? So a lot of the gripe comes from how the characters aren't developed. They're much more developed in the comic. There's poor writing on the television show. So would a way to appease these people is to just have a straight up adaptation, just, you know, right from the pages? Or do viewers like the fact that they can't predict what's going to happen in the show, having read the comic books, that they'd like that, oh, well, I have a basis, right, for the show. I come with some knowledge, but at the end of the day, it's still a surprise for me, and that's pleasurable, right? So what could we do to kind of get everybody happy? So the answer, or what the studio might think could be an answer, would be to have the best of both worlds. So here is a comment that I got from IMDb, which I think is quite revealing, and much of it is the same, right? It's, you know, as an avid reader of the comic books, you know, and then it goes on, you know, at length to kind of say why the graphic novel was a bit better than the television show with regard to the governor's story arc. But I thought the most interesting thing came at the end. The fourth season looks like it might be an improvement, as I've already seen hints of a comic book storyline emerging. So kind of between season 2 and 3, the comic book storyline kind of got thrown out the window. It wasn't this direct adaptation. It kind of went on, the television show kind of went on its own way. But this person, or this commenter, thinks like going into the fourth season, it might be improved because there's a return to the comic books. And that's precisely what happened, especially when Gimple, Scott M. Gimple, took over as showrunner. So here are just some examples of the show kind of returning to its graphic roots. Obviously not the first comparison with Rick, right? And that's from the pilot, but the other two are kind of from this past season, right? So the introduction of Abraham, right? Ripped right from the comic, right? There's an intentionality to recreate that comic book cover, right? And then there's the whole Lizzie and Mika story, right? So it's not a direct adaptation of the comic book counterpoint, but there was this kind of, if you look at the message boards, there were a lot of people saying, the show is still surprising me because I kind of maybe thought this might be the character, but it didn't really happen, and then it manifested. And then you have the drama fans who are equally like, wow, this is great drama. I haven't read the comic books, but that storyline was seriously effed up, right? So there's this kind of intentionality, especially in this past season, to return to the comic books, to hopefully appease those people that I'm talking about, Team Comic. And here's a much more clear example from the season finale. So here's the kind of marauder scene on the left side from the comic book, and I couldn't really find a good picture. That it's probably quite dark. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll just play the clip. So spoiler alert, I guess. I should have said that at the beginning. As well, I know there's some children here, but I'm assuming that you're familiar with the show. But it's interesting if you just take a look at how the graphic novels, the panels are set up, and how the scene plays out in the season finale.
What the hell are you gonna do now, sport?
See, we even got this, if you look at the top right-hand corner on the panel, right, you've got even Carl's, that same kind of tableau emulating again. And here's just a clip from The Talking Dead, where Gimple kind of talks about this scene specifically.
Scott, what inspired you to write the Claimers ambush scene?
Well, that is, you know, that is directly
Pretty close.
Yeah, ripped from the pages of The Walking Dead.
I knew that, but I just didn't want to.
Yes.
It was a dumb question for me,
Chris,
but I wanted for the people who aren't reading the
Yeah.
comics that should. But that is a completely analogous scene to something that happens while they're out on the road.
Michelle McLaren,
Yep.
wonderful director. of the episode, I mean, we had pages on set. Of that sequence.
Yeah.
So Charlie Adler did some work there too. But you know, it was reimagined within our story. I knew we were leading to that point, but it was repurposed that way.
Yeah.
I mean, that is there from you know, from a thematic standpoint. It is the moment of transformation for Rick. It is the time when he moves as far away from the farmer he was to the warrior we leave him with. And it's about confidence as well. I mean, it's about knowing that
it's about having
this.
the confidence to rip someone's throat out with your teeth. Like, I'm not a confident person. I don't think I could do that.
Nor I.
Yeah,
nor I.
But I feel so self-confident that I can rip this guy's jugular.
It's a lot like Rudy.
It's like Rudy meets Twilight.
Yes.
But it was definitely a scene that when I watched, you know, I was like, F yeah! Like I shouldn't have gotten so excited, but to see you come back that way.
Well, but that actually, if I might,
please.
That was. I remember talking to Kirkman about this. The hope was when we were sitting and doing this scene that the audience would be like, oh yeah, hell yes, yeah, and then all of a sudden, Rick lays his teeth on this guy, and you're just like, I don't know how I feel about that.
So, you know, there's a lot of revealing things with that interview. There's this intentionality. Yes, we're totally emulating the comic books. We had the pages right there. He even cites the illustrator as, you know, being part of that scene, as well as having conversations with Kirkman and kind of what is it that they're trying to achieve with this scene. So, why is it important? We could argue that, you know, this is a way on part of the Walking Dead television people to get the comic book fans, the ones that I was talking about, back on board, right? And really loving both objects, right? And not having this, you know, dichotomy, right? So why is it important for them to capture that group? Like, why can they, like, their ratings are crazy. Like, why do they care at the end of the day? And, you know, there are other fans that probably have problems, you know, with, say, the racism on the show or the way women are treated on the show, you know. How are they going to speak to those groups? And it's really trying to understand why it's so important to kind of return to something. Is it just an artistic intentionality, or, you know, does that group of fans represent power, essentially? So that brings us to quite a bigger issue when we talk about fans, right? And now that we're in this kind of digital culture, right, where we can instantaneously tweet Scott Gimple, we can tweet the producers of the show, we can tweet the writers, they can read our blog posts, they can read our comments. There's a lot of talk in the current literature that talks about fans as essentially the audience, right? The audience are fans. When we think about television, you know, 40 years ago, the audience was this big homogenous blob, right? But now there is this kind of understanding that no, our audiences are just as diverse as we are as people, right? And that's something that comes up a lot in communication studies, but especially with the advent of, you know, digitization of content, of how we use social media, now all of that stuff starts getting documented online. So you can't hide from that. You can't say that, you know, 18 to 35 is this same group at the end of the day. So I've just pulled a quote here from Henry Jenkins, who is one of the people who talks quite a bit about this. So he says, in the old days, the ideal consumer watched television, bought products, and didn't talk back, right? It's messages are pushed, right? Push media. Today, the ideal consumer talks up a program, spreads the word about a brand. The old ideal might have been a couch potato, but the new ideal is almost certainly a fan. So, you know, it's important for producers to really listen to fans, and you can kind of see that with shows like Lost, right? Where there's an intentionality of when they created the show that they wanted to have this fan community, where they killed off characters, you know, when they weren't, when there was a lot of chatter online about how much people hated them. And arguably you could say the same thing happened with, you know, Lori or Andrea or insert female character here. So at the end of the day, you know, why is it important that they speak to all of these subsets, right? It's because they want the comic book fans to speak positively about the show, because at the end of the day, they were the ones, they created the show knowing that the comic book fan already had a devoted fan base, right? let's do the television show. The graphic novel is doing enormously well. That's probably something that figured into it. I mean, I don't know personally, but that's what I'm kind of conjecturing. And at the end of the day, fans, especially now, when we talk about television viewers, they want more than just that hour every week. I mean, think about it. You guys are here right now, obviously because you have a desire to talk about this franchise, right? So let's take a look at The Walking Dead is what we term a transmedia text, and really that's just a fancy way to say that the narrative unfolds over multiple media, right? So we've got the comic book and we've got the television show. From that spawns video games, right? A couple video games, a couple webisodes. Now there's this thing called Story Sync, so you can, again, enhance your experience of when you're watching the show. There's a social media game, and there's even a whole other talk show just talking about The Walking Dead. So we can see that The Walking Dead is actually quite smart, right? Knowing that, think about how you consume media, right? Do you just watch TV? Or, you know, when you consume media, you're online, you read books, you play games. We do all of these things, right? So The Walking Dead is kind of really smart in kind of allowing the franchise to be accessed at all of these different points. So if we think about it, look at all the different kinds of audiences that we have when we think about the consumption of The Walking Dead, right? Very different subsets, but there's also a lot of overlap. So when we're looking at the potential audience, we're looking at an audience that is transmediated. So we're going to have different pockets. We're going to have different kinds of audiences. People like me who like watching for the drama. People who kind of love the graphic novel and want to see how their characters translate on screen. People who want to complain about it. All of these things are evident when we think about the construction of the audience. And you know, we all know complainers are very prevalent. They're in every, you're never gonna satisfy everybody, but what we can see, especially with Gimple's tenure, is that there is a definite intention of returning to the comic roots and really speaking to this subset of fans who, you know, have been complaining about the trajectory of the show. So at the end of the day, you know, why does this research matter? Why am I here? Why should I care? Why should we care what the audience looks like? Why should we care that it's this diverse pocket? At the surface level, what we're looking at is we're looking at what people do in their leisure time, right? We're looking at the social context of leisure. But the implications of that time is really, really important if you think about it. We spent an exorbitant amount of time watching television, being online, attached to our smartphones. I mean, if you want to challenge me on that, bring it on, but there are statistics, you know, that suggest that we're plugged in, right? So understanding our relationship to the mediums in which we consume, as well as the text that we consume, that we choose to consume, right? Television now is very a la carte. If you think about Netflix, right? It's like Netflix says, here's all your choices, you can pick whatever you want, anytime you want, right? And that's kind of our culture right now of consumption, is a la carte. So it's really important for us as scholars to understand why society is choosing certain things over another and spending their weekends, you know, in lines and listening to panels, right? Because whatever takes place in the private sphere, that's what we think about when we think about our time, right? The private sphere versus the public, where we have to, you know, go to work and make money. Eventually, that whatever you do in your private sphere will seep into the public sphere, right? Just think about the conversations that you have at work, right? And, you know, the proverbial water cooler, for lack of a better metaphor. Ultimately, you know, understanding pop culture, understanding what we're consuming, really defines citizenship now in a digital era. And that's really what I'm kind of interested in my own research. So I'm looking to kind of develop a conception of the audience and why that's important. And it is nebulous and it is a little bit scary thinking about all the different pockets. And this is just The Walking Dead. I mean, I don't even want to think about the plethora of other shows, but to me it's very interesting and it's very important. So that's all I got for you. Hopefully you guys have a lot of questions, and you know, maybe you could tell me what subset you're a part of and how you form that. So thanks for your attention. Anybody have questions? Oh, someone's coming.
Okay. With the inclusions of some of the newer comic book elements into the show, like say the tank scene at the end of the season and the murder, the little girl's murder, do you feel it has improved the television show at all? As opposed to, you said you were a fan of season 2, whereas a lot of people weren't. Do you feel it's improved the show at all, or has it detrimented it in any way?
For me personally, I miss those references, right? Because I'm not a comic book reader, so it is interesting to kind of look back on it. I was a little bored this season, in terms of the front half, right, with Farmer Rick, and I was like, oh my god, right? Everything's perfect. But I thought the latter half of the season was quite strong because you broke off into little groups. Like, I don't know who Tyrese is. Who is this, like, the guy from The Wire? I've already forgotten his name. Bob Stuckey, right? Yeah. I mean, like, who is this guy and why am I supposed to care about him? I mean, he's going to die soon, right? Because he's black. So why should I care about him? And for me, that latter half of the season was really good because I needed time to spend with these characters. Like Sasha, for example. I mean, I was like, I could, go either way if she eats it or not. But now I feel like she's a really strong character, and I want, I feel for her and I care about her, right? And I think that in terms of drama, I'm speaking as a drama fan, I think that it's quite, it's picked up quite a bit. And, I think that intentionality works the other way as well. It speaks to the comic book fans saying, yes, like those lines, like Rick's last lines in the season finale, ripped right from the comic books, for television. But it kind of makes me want to pick up the comic books again, to see those scenes playing out and get that additional background that everybody's talking about, because everyone says the comic books are much more rich, right, than the television. So I think it's really smart of the Walking Dead producers to do that, because you think about how the audience that it's capturing, it's inspiring those who haven't read the comic books. Chris Hardwick even said that, right? As well as telling the comic book fans, come back, we can still surprise you with like the Lizzie and Mika story. We can build on what you know and enhance it. So, yes.
So, how much of it do you think is them trying to like heal a schism, versus how much of it is just plain merchandising? You're saying that maybe you might go back and read the comic books now, which means you have to buy them.
Yeah.
Whereas the comic book people now have to watch the TV show, which ups their ratings, which increases. So how much of it do you think is merchandising versus actually trying to heal the rift, if you will?
Oh, I mean, at the end of the day, getting the comic book fans who are vitriolic about the television show is all about money, right? And it's all about advertising. Let's not pretend that that's not the elephant in the room, right? And I've actually me and a couple other colleagues have worked on an entire paper about how the audience is kind of transmediated and how it's, we looked at the comic book sales, after, when a season starts, and how the comic book sales spike, as well as the video game series, right, and how release dates are very dependent, right? If there's even a picture that one of my colleagues took of a comic book store, and it had a poster from the television series, right? So it's kind of like beckoning, oh, television viewers, come read the comic book. So I think at the end of the day, what makes the show successful is the audience, right? And the numbers, right? So I think it's probably a balance of both, probably more leaning towards the merchandising side of it. But that's not to say that we don't get great drama coming out of it, right, or great television, so. Any other questions?
Well, as a fan of the show and the comics, I find things like the CDC and like the Sophia story kind of interesting in comparison to it just being ripped completely from the comics, because I would just get bored,
Sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Like I find as a fan of both.
Oh, you're a fan of both, okay.
Yes,
awesome.
but like things like the CDC and the Sophia story, kind of interesting, as it just being ripped from the comics. I would get bored and it would be the same thing, and like there's kind of like a balance. Like I kind of like that. I guess it's more of a statement than a question.
So, okay, so as a fan of both, are you all caught up this season? Yeah. So how do you feel about seeing, are you reading the comic books in tandem with the show?
No, I'm like 120 up to the comics.
Right, okay, so then, yeah, so you're perfect. So how did you feel about seeing those, like the Lizzie and Mika story?
I thought that was like really good and fantastic, because back in season 3 when they had Ben, who was actually there, it was like, where's the Ben and Billy story? Where is it? And,
right.
Yeah.
So were you expecting it? Were you looking for it?
No, I wasn't expecting it at all, because they'd already passed with Alan and Billy and stuff. Like, it was kind of exciting.
Okay, and does it make you want to watch?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, so there you go. A perfect example of how this is working, right? And yeah, how I can see, you know, if you take a direct adaptation, people are going to get bored. I already know this story. Why do I need to see it, you know? And with a movie, that might work because it's kind of finite, but with a series, you know, that might be problematic. So I don't admire the writers thinking about, you know, where they're going to take the show, how they're going to take the show. And I think the showrunners probably have a big part in that. We're on what, showrunner number 3, right? 4? There was Darabont, Mazzara, and Gimple, right? And Kirkman is in the mix, and there are kind of rumors about how they didn't really gel with Kirkman, right? So hopefully Gimple will stay around for another season or so. But yeah, I do think that there are all of these people now with the television show, whereas I think with the graphic novel, it's probably in the hands of Kirkman. So it's an interesting balance to see how all of these things are being negotiated.
Hi. I just wondered what your opinion was on sort of the limitations that one medium has over the other. So the television show has a built-in problem with the fact that budgets become an issue. The fact that they, you know, continually stay in Georgia because they get tax breaks. The fact that all of the zombies are wearing full-body clothing because it's too expensive to be, you know, having their arms and legs be zombified. Those types of things. The fact that there's all the fights between, well, you just mentioned the different showrunners, that both of the previous ones were complaining about interference by AMC, and the fact that they, you know, they are just going, or at least the idea is that they're so worried about their profits that it interferes with the storytelling. The fact that they're having to sort of condense a lot of the travel that the comic book has into Georgia and not leaving Georgia. How do you feel that, you know, and whereas the comic books don't have that limitation, they have a much broader, unlimited sort of universe with which to deal. How do you feel that affects the issues that you're bringing up with regards to the comparisons between the two?
Yeah, so when we're talking about a transmedia text, we're talking about how each medium, so comic book, television show, video game, they all enhance this narrative world, right? It's that the narrative world is so broad that one medium can't possibly contain it. And us as fans are really interested in being in this world and seeing it, that we're willing to go watch the television show, play the game, how many hours that takes, and read the comic books and keep buying issue after issue, right? It's because we're interested in this world. And when we talk about a transmedia text, we're talking about nothing being redundant, right? So that's why it's not an adaptation. The show is meant to complement the graphic novel. The video game is meant to complement, right? They're all meant to work together. If you think about the Matrix, right? The Animatrix and the graphic novel and then the online game, right? There's no redundancy, or there shouldn't be in an ideal world. That's not to say that that doesn't happen, but ideally, that's what it is. And I think that's how we have to see it. The graphic novel, it's not a replacement, right? It's not meant to replace, it's meant to enhance your experience, right? You're already in love with these characters and you want to hear more about them, so you watch the television show, or vice versa. Now the show's on hiatus. What are we going to do? We're dying, right? Go to the comic book and binge. You know, there are people who buy multiple issues and just binge until October 12th, 2014, when the show comes back on air, right? So I think there are always going to be limitations with television as drama, right? And actors too, if they want to move on to other projects, etc. But I think the key to that is seeing each medium as being complementary to one another rather than redundant. So I got the infamous 5-minute warning sign. Do we have time for one more? Yeah, if anybody has one more question or... Cool. Well, thank you again for your attention, and if you want to come talk Walking Dead with me, I'm always game, so thanks again.